Go and good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Mike.
Good to see you guys and hanging in there with the Zoom. My feeling is I was overwhelmed by the quality of meeting via Zoom. I was overwhelmed at the beginning, and now I'm not so much overwhelmed, but I think it's become an effective tool. There is no substitute for live meeting, which we've already talked about this morning. And but if for in the meantime, we've got Zoom. So let's get started. We are in week 58, and can you guys all see my my slide?
Oh.
Also, note. I had a conversation with John White, and he suggested maybe a good idea would be to, once we go into breakout rooms, stop the video just for not secrecy, but what would you call it, John? Just for
anonymity.
Anonymity, yeah.
Privacy, just privacy.
Yeah, that's a good word, privacy. So, John, thanks for that suggestion. And when we go to breakout, I will stop the video. So the video follows me, whatever room I'm in. So those of you are in breakout rooms, it is a private room. But today it'll be super private. The room that I join you will not have video. So, all right. I think we're being, just want to make sure we're being recorded. So, all right, let's get started. Review last week, we really ended up on verse 7, actually verse 18. And this whole, I'm calling it maximum rejection. And just to kind of refresh our minds, when that is because, Carl's just kind of joining us, when the religious authority, Carl, when they hear Jesus stating that, quote, my Father is working and I too am working, verse 17, they interpret that through their fear-enacted lens of comparison. I mean, they go ballistic. There's something in this statement about Jesus as claiming God as Father that just put them over the top. And what we discussed last week is that what they see is not a relationship. They see competition. They see this man from Nazareth is claiming competition with Yahweh. And when they hear these words in their minds, they quote, that just can't be. We must fix this. He must be removed. There is no other way. And so this is, in a sense, a culminating piece of the story here in chapter 5, and will inform the rest of the story, culminating with the crucifixion of Christ and on the cross. This idea of rejection. We're going to see rejection by the powers that be from here on out. We read this and we say, there is no way Jesus is claiming to be in competition. That's the farthest thing from his mind and our mind. On the contrary, he's stating ultimate interdependence with his heavenly Father. That's what that means. Well, we know that, but we've got an advantage. We're reading this statement 2,000 years and several church councils, which were dedicated to the debating of the Holy Trinity later. In the mind of the Jewish authority in the New Testament times and prior, God is one. There is one God. There is no such thing in their mind as a Holy Trinity. Although Scripture seems to bear out in the Old Testament allusions to other persons of the Godhead, but that's beyond the scope of what this session is about. The point is here how garbled up things can get. And the reason things get garbled up, guys, is our predisposed perceptions of reality. So could somebody read verses 19 through 23? That will be our text for today as we move off of this ultimate rejection and we find out what's next.
Then answered Jesus and said to them, Verily I say unto you, the Son can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father do. For what things he does, those also does the Son. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all things that he does. And he will show him greater works than these, that you may marvel. For as the Father raises up the dead and quickens them, even so the Son quickens those whom he will. For the Father judges no man, but has committed all judgment to the Son, that all men should honor the Son, even as they honor the Father. He that honors not the Son honors not the Father, which has sent him.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
That's a fractured King James.
Yep, yeah, that's fine. So let's move on. Let's analyze this section. First things first here, John 19 through verses 47, which is the end of the chapter, is the first major discourse by Jesus in John's gospel account. There will be others, and these are longer teachings that are triggered off some event. The event here takes place in verse 17, where Jesus claims to have this relationship with God the Father. And the trigger is stated in verse 18 as he's got to die, and the intent to kill him. Maximum rejection is what is informing this discourse, verses 19 through 47. This discourse, it has two major sections. The first section is verses 19 through 30 plus or minus, because, guys, it's not that clear. But somewhere between 29 and 32, there's a break. And there's a movement from the first section, which is revolving around information and dialogue regarding monologue regarding the Father and the Son relationship. So I'm using that as my weaving factor in interpreting 19 through 30. The second section, beginning somewhere around verse 31, is there's a shift, and that shift now moves towards witness. There are several witnesses, and in our minds we ask, well, why, and what does this have to do with maximum rejection? That's what we're going to find out as we work our way through the text. So today we'll be starting to work our way through. We're going to be looking at verses 19 through 23 in the first section. And the primary idea there is the father-son relationship. Now, as we read through verses 19 through 30, key words emerge which indicate some level of common understanding between what Jesus said, John as the author, and the first century readers. Let me just pause for a minute. Guys, I get input on these texts, and it is not real clear. These discourses are not slam dunk. So there's lots of room for interpretation. So thus, what I'm meticulously working through systematically through this. And what I'm stating here, first of all, is that there's got to be a common understanding that Jesus begins from. And that common understanding has to be common ground between Jesus and the immediate audience and John's authors, John as author, and his first century readers. So there's a lot of people listening in. And we've got to believe that there's a common understanding here as we begin. And so where I begin in this is trying to pick out this common understanding, or what are the terms, well, that are used in this section. The first term is Father. That term is used 6 times in this section. And the Jewish authority and the Jews of the first century and before would have had an understanding as God Almighty as Father. Probably not, guys, like we do. But there are Old Testament references. There is the idea of God as Father. Again, I want to make it clear, though, not as pronounced as we probably perceive that, but it was in their understanding. God, Yahweh as Father. I didn't list any references for that. So Son, not so much, as the only reference to a divine image connected with Son is out of Daniel chapter 7, the Son of Man. And we may be looking at that, but Jesus is taking God the Father and Son and bringing them together. Some understanding, where they would have seen the father-son relationship would have been primarily in the father as craftsman, son as apprentice, and the one teaching the other. And that language is actually reflected in this text that we're going to be reading. The next term that we see repeated several times is judge or judgment, and we'll be looking at that today, this idea of judgment. And the people of first century believers in Yahweh would have had the idea of judgment. It is not the same idea as what you and I have today, but it's the idea that at the end of time, there'll be a general resurrection, and there will be some sort of judgment that happens. And primarily on what you do, primarily on your actions. The other really key word here is life. And Jesus is talking about life in a totally new and different way. And that'll bear out as we look at the text. The last word, and the word that I've used to key my thoughts on, is the word for. What you're going to hear is a statement and then the word for. And that for is an expansion of what was said before in simple grammatical use. It's an explanation, it's an enlightenment. And so we're going to be looking at this father-son relationship, aspects of it, keying on this word for. And I've got this term, if you can see it, the weave idea. Jesus is not doing a didactic point-by-point PowerPoint A, B, C, D presentation on the father-son relationship. It's more of a talk and a weaving of highlights together. And we will be looking at it. And that would have been a common way of expression during that day. So a lot of detail, guys, I know, but I think it'll help us understand this difficult portion that we're going to be looking at. So 19a starts out, therefore Jesus answered and was saying to them, truly, truly. We're going to see this this term, truly, truly, in the King James, it's verily, verily. We're going to see that 3 times in this section, and that means listen up, something's really important. Truly, truly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of himself. That is an amazing statement. Unless it is something he sees the Father doing. And so let's look at 19a. First of all, the way I've got this drawn here is over here is what is before. John 5, 1 through 17 is where the story of the healing of the man, the pushback by the religious authority, the statements of Jesus, maximum rejection. So verses 1 through 17 lead to here. And the reason the religious authority of that day in Jerusalem is rejecting Jesus is for 2 reasons. One, they really didn't like the fact that he was doing what they perceived as work on the Sabbath. And what really put him over the top was this thing where they viewed his statement as competition with God and putting him into a place of equal with God. And from their perception, he was making a claim to attainment, that Jesus was claiming to be in competition with Yahweh God, a claim to attainment. This was their perception. Now, on the other side, if flip side, arrow, I actually could have drawn a line here, might have been better than an arrow. But in verse, but 19 does flow out of 18. That's why I used an arrow, I guess. What I'm saying is that, on the contrary, Jesus is not claiming competition. He's claiming interdependence and a relationship, that everything he does flows out of an eternal relationship that has existed since the get-go. And it all has to do, this talk is going to be around this idea of work and what the Father is doing. Now, it's implied by both, it's implied by the original audience that attempting to save a life on the Sabbath is permissible and even encouraged. It's better to err on the side of violating the Sabbath rather than putting a life in danger. So the religious authority would have been working from that construct, that's saving a life. And this is what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about saving a life in regard to the immediate context of healing this man at the pool of Bethesda. Now, our minds kind of go on tilt for a minute, but bear with me. Because he didn't save his life. He only healed him. But let's look. So before we move on, in contrast to claiming to attainment, Jesus is saying, I'm working out of a relationship with God the Father. Like apples and oranges here. 2 separate perceptions. Now, then we flow into 19b, and here is what I'm calling the 4, number 1. 4, right here. For whatever the Father does, these things the Son also does in like manner. So the entire verse could be looked at like this. Doing nothing independently, 19a, it's the negative. Jesus does nothing without the Father. That is an amazing statement. And then he goes on to say in 19b, he does everything in concert with the Father, or there's a cohesion. So doing nothing independently, doing everything cohesively, it equals something. Total interdependence. That he and the Father, of course, we know this, are one. And so 4, number 1, the word 4, the first thing about this relationship the number one thing he's talking about is and he's giving insight into the inner workings of this relationship, which would have been new to them. There is a relationship within the Godhead, and this gives some level of explanation of this relationship. He moves on in verse 20, and here is number 2. Here is the second number 2, 4. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all things that he himself is doing. And the Father will show him greater works than these, so that you may marvel. Boy, there's a mouthful there as well. This relationship, fellas, is fundamentally a relationship of love. This is what is at the very core of this relationship between Yahweh God and the Son. And within that relationship, what love does is it shows, it reveals, in contrast to secrecy and withholding. Love is transparent. Love is out showing and sharing, and which we understand love to be as well. So that, we're taking the verse apart, so that you will marvel. That Jesus is saying this love relationship has a direct correlation and effect and impact on your life, so that you will marvel. And so number 2, the genetics of the relationship is love. So we've looked at the workings, this interchange. We're looking at the genetics of this relationship, which is the very core of love. And then he moves on to number 3, which is right here. 4. Do you get the idea of how he's saying this? He's got all these statements like bullet points, all describing this relationship. 4, just as the Father raises the dead, he moves to a new topic. He raises the dead and gives them life. Even so, the Son also gives life to whom he wishes. What do you think Jesus is referring to in the immediate context about giving life? Any comments?
The man at the pool.
He's talking about the man at the pool in a different light. He's talking about it in a larger context about life. It is permissible under Jewish law to raise to save a life on the Sabbath. And Jesus is correlating his activity as initiated by the Father as one who is giving life, saving a life at the pool of Bethesda on the Sabbath. This statement, comment?
Yeah, I was going to say, we have the opportunity, you're asking, we have the opportunity to offer life to others through the gospel.
Well, yeah, Carl, that's the idea. We're not hearing you very well, but we got that statement.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
This statement would have been clear to the religious leaders and to John's first century readers. God's ability to give life was at the center of Old Testament faith. There you go. It was to give life. And there's scriptural references there that you can actually, this will be posted later at the Christ in the Rockies website, but you can look up these texts about life and death. Jesus is acting in concert with the Father and well within compliance to Old Testament law, i.e. saving a life. Jesus is correlating the healing of the man to a saving of a life, like we just talked about. And so here is number 3, the effective power of this relationship. So the first idea is how it works. Number 1, and then he moves on and he talks about what's at the core of this relationship. It's love. And then now number 3, what difference does it make? There is power. There is life-giving power in this relationship, and that's what this third 4 is depicting us. Now, the last 4 that we'll look at this morning is number 4. There we go. Number 4 right here. 4 moves on to a new topic. Not even the Father judges anyone, but he, the Father, has given all judgment to the Son, so that, a direct result, all will honor the Father even as they honor the Son. And then he puts that on its head and states it in the opposite. He who does not honor the Son does not honor the Father as well. And so he's making a statement right there. Now, this statement by Jesus about God the Father is very different from how most of us perceive God. We humans tend to think of God in terms of the divine rule maker. Our job is to live by the rules. You know, God made all things. He's in charge. He set things operable in a certain kind of way, and it's a good idea to follow those rules. If the rules are broken, here is where the word judgment comes in. Judgment occurs. Jesus stands in between. Now, Jesus's role is to stand in between, in some constructs, an angry God and the person. So Jesus stands in between to be the intermediary, the one that, now not everyone believes this, but the one that stands in the gap to take the punishment of what is due the person who has broken the rules. Now, this basic perception, it has all levels of nuance. Guys, we are all over the map on what we believe about this, which has been discussed and heatedly debated for millennia. But the basic idea, God's in charge. He's set up ways things ought to operate. We are given the gift of life, and it's a good idea to keep those rules, because if we don't, bad things are going to happen. And Jesus stands in between as kind of a protection of God. Now, I'm stating this in a very general sense, but this is where the term judgment comes into play. Now, further, we humans tend to think of judgment solely as condemnation. Boy, this is important. When we hear the word judgment, we think getting your knuckles busted by your 6th grade teacher when she bangs you over the hand with a ruler. Bam, condemnation. However, guys, the entire gospel account thus far has to do with impartation of life through hearing and receiving. From the get-go of chapter 1, I am come to give you life. Now, he hasn't stated that yet. That'll come later. But it is all about receiving the life, hearing and receiving. So how do we reconcile all this? For not even the Father. Okay, so here we go. Verse 22. Jesus states the Father judges no one. Boy, is that different. Jesus is making a claim about God the Father that he judges no one. Put that in our theological hats. Ponder that a little bit. But rather has given all judgment to his Son.
I can go anytime.
He then continues.
I've got my earphones.
Hey, Carl, could you mute your microphone?
Yeah.
He then continues in verse 23 by stating the purpose of this delegated power, emphasizing that it is not either or, but rather both. It is not the Father or the Son, or the Son or the Father, but what he's stating is something entirely new and out of their categories. It's both. It's both. The religious authority would have understood the idea of one being sent, fully empowered to act on behalf of the sender. That was very clear in their minds. However, what was new, and as here proved to be the great rub, was Jesus's claim to be that one. This is where they came down. This is what they could not accept. So, number 4, the authority structure of this relationship. What Jesus is saying here very concisely in this verse is the Father is not the one to judge, although I'm sure we could argue that from other biblical texts, especially we take the entire Old Testament, but that he's delegated the authority of judgment to the Son. And of course, we have in our minds are clear why that is so. And within this, there is a delegated authority and a relationship within that is before them. So we've got 4 things to look at table time. We're running a few minutes over because I've been rambling here. Which of these is most meaningful to you and why? Here's the time when you snap your picture. Number 1, the inner workings of the relationship. Number 2, the genetics of the relationship. Number 3, the effective power of the relationship. Or number 4, the structure of the relationship. So those are things to think about. Snap those pictures. So when you go to breakout, you can remember what you were to talk about. So if you want to. So I'll break you guys up now, and then I'll stop the video and have a good time. Well, then I'll bring you back here in a little bit. So.